151 hours later, and I am finally finished Persona 5 Royal. This is a really big game, but overall, I really enjoyed this, so as I've promised, I'm going to give my thoughts on Persona 5 Royal. Just an advance warning, this is only my opinion, and it's also unscripted and taking place very soon after I've finished the game for the first time myself, so these opinions are all very fresh in my mind, but remember that opinions can change over time, and some of the thoughts that I present here might just be knee-jerk reactions. If you want the short summary, the third semester is absolutely fantastic, and the new gameplay additions make the original Persona 5's gameplay look bad, and that really says something considering how great that was already compared to earlier Persona games. I am still slightly hesitant to recommend this to people who played the original though, simply because the main storyline is mostly unchanged, and that's a lot of familiar content you have to play through to get to the new stuff. In my opinion, the third semester is definitely worth the wait, but it is a very long wait. And that might not be something everyone who's played the original will be willing to go through. Okay, so firstly, my thoughts on new gameplay additions. I'm going to be a little brief about this, because I can sum up most of it just by saying I love all of them, especially the buffs to technical damage. I didn't find technical damage all that useful in the original game, but now it's a vital part of combat. Which also makes status ailment extremely useful against regular enemies, especially those with no weaknesses. Technical damage being guaranteed knockdown when fully upgraded with billiards also means more opportunities to use the baton pass system, which has also been buffed. And another thing that I love about this, every party member starts with it now. You don't have to unlock rank 2 of their Confidant just to use Baton Pass, and a lot of fans have said that that alone fixed a lot of the problems with the 5th Palace. The only complaint I have about the technical system is that enemies that are immune to Psi are effectively way harder to get technical damage on, because you can only really get it via physical ailments like burn, freeze, and shock, and there's no guaranteed way to inflict those. Customized guns are pretty reliable at inflicting those ailments, but in terms of basic skills, I know a lot of people have said that Makoto's Persona's trait has helped them with this. I don't think I ever saw Gaia Pact make a difference. I could just be painfully unlucky, but that's how it went for me. Ryuji, even with Shock Boost and Gaia Pact, almost never inflicted shock when I needed it. Speaking of guns though, I love the change they made, where guns now refill their ammo every battle. They even justify it through the metaverse mechanics. Makes guns way more worthwhile. It makes enemies that are weak to guns, especially in the first dungeon where you're much more limited in terms of resources, a lot easier to deal with. Admittedly, the Tower Confidant's downshot is less useful now, but it's a small price to pay. In terms of other gameplay additions, they've added phone conversations at the end of Confidant rank ups that make some of them a little faster to increase. And they've changed some Confidant abilities to buff a few that were weaker originally, especially Ryuji's insta-kill, which is now one of the best methods of grinding ever. Yusuke's skill card replication is also way more useful than it used to be. Unfortunately, despite buffing Oya's Devil Confidant, it still sucks, which really says something. And strength is also even more busted than it used to be, which, again, really says something. Apart from that though, I like the way they handled Confidants and Royal overall. They also added some new activities and minigames for daily life. I especially like darts. I didn't at first, but once I got the hang of it, I found it really fun. The Jazz Club is also a great new addition. It's basically a better version of the bike skills from Persona 4 Golden. Another great addition to daily life is that all of those plot nights where previously you were forced to go to bed have become cannot leave LeBlanc nights, which is exactly what it says on the tin. You can't leave the cafe, but you can still do activities in the cafe, such as reading, studying, making tools, watching DVDs, or playing video games. There are still a few points where you're forced to go to bed, but it's nowhere near as bad as the original. As far as gameplay goes, Persona 5 has always been a very easy game, and Royal made it even easier with things like the fusion alarm. But it's still really fun. Not all games need to be brutally difficult. Almost every random shadow encounter I found is winnable in one turn, no matter what your party or persona setup, and it's often a fun puzzle finding out exactly how to do that one turn win. There's one other aspect that's sort of gameplay related that I could talk about here, but I'm going to save that for the story section, because I'll just say it's the Justice Confidant. But before I jump into story, I'll talk about one other thing that I think has improved dramatically in Royal, and honestly, this is one of the improvements that I was hoping for the most. They greatly refined the localization, especially in the early game portions. A lot of the original's most awkwardly translated lines, like "the girl of rumor" and "Kamoshida was a scum," have been retranslated to sound a lot more natural. It's something that always bothered me about the original Persona 5. First impressions are important, and the fact that it was the very beginning arc of the game that was the most badly translated was definitely a sore point for me when I first played. I always felt the localization quality improved a lot the more you went into the game, but those really bad lines from the very start definitely leave an impression. But pretty much all of those lines are gone now. I mean, compare this
It means they're holding nothing back and are serious to kill us.
to this.
Looks like it's not about capturing us anymore. They're out for blood.
It's saying the same thing, but the Royal version is so much better. It's not perfect, they still kept the Aburage joke, but these moments are few and far between, though... Okay, I will rant about one line, but I will just say, this is just a nitpick. There is one line I was really hoping they'd change, and they didn't. It's a huge spoiler, but this line comes right before you're about to deal the final blow to the vanilla game's final boss. I always thought this line was awful in the original game, and it came during one of the story's coolest moments, which was always a sore spot for me. I was hoping they'd retranslate it, unfortunately they didn't, but again, it's only one line, and overall the dialogue is so much better in Royal that I'm willing to give this a pass, albeit reluctantly. So now on to story, and from here there will be some definite spoilers for the original game. I'll keep all of the Royal exclusive story spoilers in their own section. As I said in the intro to this, I do think the main story of Royal is mostly the same as it was in the original game, both the good and the bad. They tried to improve some things, like giving Haru a few appearances before her arc starts, but I don't think they really succeeded. Just giving Haru a couple of NPC cameos in the school is nowhere near enough to fix the main complaint people had with her, as she's still completely irrelevant before her arc begins, and ends up mostly irrelevant after the arc ends. I'd look to Naoto from Persona 4 as an example of how to do a late joining party member right. Heck, even Shinjiro from P3 did this better. Both characters appeared a lot in major story scenes until they joined. Haru in Royal was really just given a bunch of irrelevant cameos. Speaking of which, there's one of her cameos in particular that I find kind of dumb. It happens during the Hawaii trip, it only lasts about 30 seconds, and has basically zero plot relevance. It only exists for two reasons. One, hey guys, remember Haru exists? And two, also, we have an excuse to show Kawakami in a bikini. Some might say otherwise, but I still feel that even with the new scenes, all of the flaws in the original game's plot are still there. The Ryuji Morgana thing in the 5th Palace arc is still exactly the same. The final human villain is still pretty lame after their reveal. The really awkward, hey, we already know this stuff, but let's exposit our entire backstories and evil plans for the sake of the audience, scene with him and the traitor is still there. You get the idea. But speaking of the traitor, and yeah, here's the point where you will definitely want to turn away if you don't want spoilers for the vanilla game, one thing I will say though, making Justice a manual confidant rather than automatic, is definitely an improvement. In terms of the actual content of the new Justice Confidant, I'm decidedly very on it. A lot of people say it made Akechi so much of a deeper character, but I don't really see it. Apart from getting a few more details on his backstory, like revealing that his mother was a sex worker. I just think the fact that the player now has to go out of their way to bond with Akechi makes the betrayal and the 7th Palace scenes with him hit a lot harder, because in the original game, due to his Confidant being automatic, the player was basically just told, hey, he and Joker have this great bond, right? Whereas now, with the player having to initiate the bond themselves and go out of their way to work to it, it's a lot easier to get invested. I don't really think this Confidant makes Akechi any more likable, but I was always of the somewhat minority opinion that Akechi was never really intended to be sympathetic to begin with. He was more meant to be a love-to-hate character that you can at least understand how he ended up the way he did, but I can't really speak to what the developers' true intentions were there. But I can say this, you know another great thing Akechi's new Confidant does for the story? It means his original rank 8 scene is completely gone. For those who don't remember, Akechi's original rank 8 was really stupid. 1, it could be summed up as, Akechi is a traitor and is pointing a gun to my head. Our bond is stronger now. And 2, he delivered the whole speech to not even the real Joker. How did the real Joker somehow know about it and it raised their bond? So yeah, the new Confidant completely erases that from existence, and I'm totally on board with this. Speaking of Akechi's rank 8 though, I do have a few issues with the new Justice rank 8. Well, there is the fact that you're forced into a one-on-one duel, and if you lose the evening and have to try again the next day, but with preparation that fight is fine. The real problem for me is that Akechi slips a bit too far into quote-unquote just everyday Akechi during that rank. And I feel that does ruin a bit of the surprise of his reveal. I mean, the reveal of him being a villain is not a surprise. The real surprise is how completely nuts he is. And getting flashes of that, and you have to do this rank before the casino heist, by the way, before the reveal, I do feel is a bit premature. But overall, I do really like his new Confidant, if not for the Confidant itself, but more just for the very fact that it's manual now. And if we're going to talk about new Confidants, now I can finally get into the 2 new royal characters. I'll start with Maruki. And I have nothing but praise for this guy, and I can sum up the reason right here. Maruki is, I feel, the best new character in any re-release I have ever played, and not just in Persona either. The thing that makes Maruki such a good new addition is he feels like he was always there. I like to think that if you were to give a copy of Royal to someone who didn't know that it was a re-release and didn't know that the original P5 existed, they wouldn't be aware that Maruki was a new character. Whereas with characters like Marie in P4 Golden, I don't hate her, but it is painfully obvious that she's a new addition to the cast. With the exception of Yusuke's, which comes in a little bit awkwardly during the school festival, Maruki's counseling sessions with every party member are, in my opinion, seamlessly integrated into the existing story. And his Confidant with Joker is really nice too. I also like they didn't go with the cliche Aeon Arcana for this re-release. They've gone with a completely different deck. Next we have Kasumi Yoshizawa, a character that, oh boy, I have exceedingly mixed opinions on, and my views of her went on a giant roller coaster as I played through Royal. I'll just stress right now that I ended up liking her, but that was mostly due to reveals in the 3rd semester. Up until that point, I actually borderline disliked her. Disclaimer before I go into this. I am definitely a Joker Makoto shipper, so some of my opinions here might be tainted by personal bias. All of the glimpses of Yoshizawa you got through the main story and her Confidant, I just found her a bit generic and really not all that interesting. Nothing about her really drew my attention. I even found her a little bit, I hesitate to say this, but unlikable in some regards. Keep in mind though that this is before the 3rd semester, and that's very important. I also felt the way she was integrated into the story was a little awkward. She definitely suffered from Marie syndrome in that regard, although honestly, she has the exact opposite problem I have to Marie. Marie, the game makes a big deal about her being like an honorary addition to the investigation team when they never interact with each other outside of optional social link scenes. With Yoshizawa, she actually is a member of the party, but she doesn't have much interaction with the rest of the party outside of Joker and Akechi, and even then it's only through a couple of additional scenes in Royal that have nothing to do with the main plot. In summary, Marie is an NPC who's treated like a party member, while Yoshizawa is a party member who's treated like an NPC. Speaking of all those little interactions that she got, remember how I drew your attention to Naoto earlier? She appeared in a lot of story scenes before she joined the party in P4. With Yoshizawa, they kind of tried the same thing, but Naoto joined much earlier than Yoshizawa does. And so in this case, I feel like they went a little bit too far with the teasing. As every time I saw Yoshizawa throughout the year, it felt physically painful because I knew that they would not be able to advance her development in any meaningful way until the new 3rd semester, which wouldn't start until the end of the vanilla game's content, which is about maybe 120 hours, and that's not even being generous. There was also one Yoshizawa scene during the main story that I personally had some issues with. That was during the school festival, already one of the most filler scenes in the game. They added an entire sequence with an anime cutscene that's just Yoshizawa dancing. It doesn't really do anything meaningful for the plot. It doesn't even advance her character development much either, because we later find out that her main passion is gymnastics, not strictly dancing. I suppose you'll like that scene if you like Yoshizawa or ship her with Joker, but as someone who doesn't, it didn't feel like the most productive use of the story's time. And speaking of the whole shipping angle, this is something that I've wanted to address for a while. I've seen a lot of people saying, oh, Yoshizawa is so much better than Marie because unlike her, she's not forced on you as a love interest for the main character. I would heavily disagree with that. So, Marie, firstly, all of those moments where people think she's forced don't happen if you're not on her romance route. Aside from one minor comment towards the end of the game, she will never show interest in the player character unless you go out of your way to make that so. Yoshizawa? Well, unlike Futaba and Haru where it's only implied, she outright confesses her love to you during her Confidant, and to get the platonic route, you have to straight up reject her. Her fitness instructor in the rank 10 says you look cute together even if you're on the platonic route. She's one of the only characters to have a Showtime attack with Joker, and said Showtime takes place in a chapel, and her 3rd tier persona is dressed as a bride and its spellcasting animation is a bouquet toss. That's not exactly subtle. You might think I'm being a bit of a hypocrite here since I've said a lot in my videos that I normally like implied canon love interests. Well, what I'm not a big fan of is when a new version of a game adds a new character and then suddenly says, hey, this person is actually the canon love interest, forget what we said before. This happened kind of with Aegis in Persona 3 The Answer, and to some extent Marie in Persona 4 Golden. But as I warned you, this could just be my Joker Makoto shipping bias here. I might be subconsciously inflicting die for our ship on Kasumi. Before we leave the subject of Kasumi, one more thing I want to discuss, and it's not really to do with her so much it is to do with the story and the writing. That moment in the cafe with Akechi, where she gives what is, in my opinion, a very good counter-argument to the actions of the Phantom Thieves, while still remaining sympathetic. And yet this angle is completely dropped after this scene, and once she awakens to her persona, suddenly she's completely on board with them. It just feels like kind of a waste to bring up an argument like that only to do nothing with it. I almost feel like it only exists so that the trailers had a way to red herring people into thinking she'd be an antagonist later. So after all that, you might get the impression that I really don't like Yoshizawa. And then the third semester happened, and my opinion did a complete 180. So now it's time for major Royal spoilers. If you have not played the new content of Royal yet, I highly encourage you not to watch any further, because it is best experience for yourself. My summary is, holy crap. I had heard good things about this new arc. I did not expect it to be this good. I honestly believe that Persona 5 Royal's third semester is the best storytelling I have seen in a Persona game. Bear in mind that I haven't played Persona 1 and 2 yet. Whoever wrote this new arc, get them to write Persona 6, please. I suspect that they're not the same people who wrote the main game of Persona 5. But I'm not sure of that. Firstly, I love the wham moment of Akechi suddenly showing up alive and going, that won't be necessary, to Joker's arrest, which then leads into the events of the third semester, where everyone is really happy, but something seems very, very off. The best way I can summarize the world that you're thrust into with the new semester is, you have been transplanted into a fanfiction. It sounds dumb, but when you think about it, that's really exactly what's going on. All of the tragedies in everyone's lives magically didn't happen. Ryuji's leg is fine, Shiho is fine, Morgana's a human, Haru's father is not dead, Futaba's mother is not dead, that therefore absolves Akechi of most of his guilt, so he's alive and well, running around going Akechi did nothing wrong. Every possible complaint with how the characters ended up at the end of the main story is solved. But something just feels very wrong and unnatural about everything. In my opinion, just like an over-the-top fix-fic. And right after you've started to feel so uncomfortable about everything, you're hit with the revelation that the only other person in this world who feels the same way, and thus your only possible ally right now, is Akechi. And it's Akechi who's making no attempt to hide his craziness either. I really love this. It's such a great beginning to the story arc. I'm trapped in a crazy false reality and oh great, the only one I can rely on is this guy. And from that you're led straight into your first palace investigation where you get greeted with one of the best things to ever exist, Navigator Akechi.
You're all my enemies! No, I am not brainwashed!
Seriously, if they made DLC to let him be Navigator for the whole game, I'd totally buy it. The new palace in general is just fantastic. I loved exploring it, especially since there's several forced infiltrations and they barely scratch the surface of the place. But talking about the new palace, we have to get into its ruler. Actually first I'll talk about what this palace does for Yoshizawa. Yes, I am specifically saying her last name and not her first name, because we get the big reveal here that Kasumi was actually her sister Sumire, brainwashed into thinking she was Kasumi. Now, I went into Royal already spoiled on this from the beginning, and it still made me turn around my opinion completely on the character. Because she really is a totally different person than what you were built up to believe. And, of course, I found the Kasumi we got to know throughout the year to be unlikable. She was a giant lie. A line from Persona 4's Moon social link really sums it up to me. Of course I didn't have any redeeming qualities, I wasn't me. And it's really interesting to go back and look at fake Kasumi and see all of the foreshadowing towards this. And also, major acting props to Laura Post here, because she essentially has to play 3 characters. The real Kasumi, Sumire as Kasumi, and the real Sumire. And all of them act like totally different people. All from the same voice actress. It's just such a good performance. And that whole scene where this is first revealed and you get the Berserk Sundreon boss fights, that is one of my favorite storytelling moments in any game in the series, or even, in fact, any game I've played. I kept a save file from before that fight just so I can replay it. One thing I love it when games do, but it's very hard to pull it off correctly, is when 2 members of the party end up coming to blows, but for entirely sympathetic reasons. The fact that after you reject Maruki's reality, Sumire manifests her will of rebellion, that's such a great show don't tell moment, and fights you, I have no words to describe how much I love this scene. Because I can totally understand why she would do this. Rejecting Maruki's reality means that she has to go back to being Sumire, which at this point she can't accept, because she believes that she essentially murdered her sister. I don't blame her for wanting to be essentially brainwashed into happiness by Maruki. The main problem I have is that he's forcing that on people who might necessarily not want that. I'll get into that when I talk about him. Not to mention the fight makes great use of the backstory of her persona, essentially Cinderella, which I'll definitely talk about a lot when I do a playthrough of Persona 5 Royal. And it's even a callback to Persona 3, with somebody's persona going out of control due to a corruption in their own psyche. One other thing that I really love about Sumire as a character is, this is just my personal bias talking, but I love it when characters have to overcome themselves. They have to accept things and change for the better. It's one of the reasons why I love Persona 4's characters, and Sumire is very much more like the Persona 4 party than the Persona 5 one. All of the Phantom Thieves had some kind of abuser in their life that they had to stand up to, but Sumire's abuser was herself. This is just my own personal bias, but stories where a character has one central villain who's responsible for all of their suffering, and defeating them will make all their pain go away, they can still be nice, but stories where a character's true greatest adversary is themselves, those are always so much more powerful to me when they're done right. So then the second half of her Confidant unlocks for real, and over the course of these, I came to really like Sumire. There's another bit of personal bias because I actually really do like her design and characters like that. And throughout her ranks 7 and 8, I even started to ship her with Joker. And here's where the roller coaster comes in, because then rank 9 hits, and I tried her platonic route first just to get the We Stand as Equals Thieves Den award. And then I went back and did the romance route, because this being royal, I wanted to go with the implied canon option so I didn't romance Makoto this time. Random tangent, but can I just say, the single Christmas Eve event where you spend it with the Sakura family is just one of the most amazing scenes in the game to me, and apparently you can't get this if you're romancing someone, so I guess that's an advantage to staying single. Seriously, if you have not seen the scene that I like to call a Sakura family Christmas, look it up. It's amazing. It's one of the most wholesome things you will ever see. But back to Sumire. I was not a big fan of how the romance route was initiated, mainly the way Joker acted during it. But after finishing the game and getting all of my thoughts together, I realized it's not exactly a problem with the Sumire/Joker ship. I'm totally on board with that. It's more the fact that I just don't like how Persona 5's romance routes are written in general. I've seen all of them, and I can't really say that I particularly like any of them. The ones in Persona 4 were a bit cheesy, but for the most part, I like a lot of them and how they're written. In P5, I kind of feel like they were trying to make Joker this kind of suave ladies' man, but this led to him coming across as a bit too forceful and sometimes even sleazy to me. And the ones where he didn't, the romance itself just felt kind of bland and not that well developed. Again, this isn't a trait of Sumire's romance. I just think Persona 5 in general doesn't have the best writing for its romance routes. And despite Xander Mobus hating it, I actually think it's one of the few games where the harem route kind of makes sense to me. But despite that final hiccup, I do still really like Sumire, and she's now one of my favourite characters in the game. It is a shame that you have to wait so long to see her real self, but it is definitely worth it. So, now that my thoughts on one new character are out of the way, oh boy, it's time for the other new character. My opinion on Maruki changed a lot with the new semester. However, I still think that he's a brilliant character, and definitely, you know what, I'll say it, I think he is the best antagonist that Persona has ever had. I overall sum him up as a character with a great balance of both being tragic, while still being someone that you feel you must stop at all costs. Like Sumire, I had been spoiled on Maruki before going into this, but he turned out to be completely different to how I pictured him. I was thinking he'd be portrayed as this innocent, wooby victim who did no wrong. And then I first saw him in the palace, and I actually got serious vibes of, I'll just say, a certain character in Fire Emblem Three Houses who I don't like. Basically, there's someone who is fanatically devoted to their methods that they personally believe will help the world. And while they claim to be a nice person, they are surprisingly intolerant of people who don't share those exact views for how to save the world. They do something that this other character also does that I like to call fake anti-violence. This is basically where they say, look, I don't want to fight you, let's talk, let's come to an understanding. But I'm not going to accept any outcome from our negotiations that isn't, you accept my way of doing things 100%. The other thing I found interesting about my views on this character was my reasons for opposing him. I feel like there are a lot of ways to interpret his actions, and I knew full well the Phantom Thieves, there was no way they were going to accept his offer, but my personal reasoning as to why was less the whole ethics of brainwashing everyone, or the ethics of a world where everyone is happy, and more just no one person should have that much power. The idea of a single person being able to shape reality at will, and being able to alter everyone's minds, whether they like it or not, to suit what they, and only they, think is best for everyone, I just think that goes against everything the Phantom Thieves stand for. It's basically exactly what Yaldabaoth was trying to do, only a lot less malicious. And the second reason why I oppose this is, again, it's the whole thing of Maruki being like, I and I alone know what's best for everyone. I know what's best for you more than you yourself do. There's a text message conversation in one of the new semester days that is really telling. Yusuke talks about how one of his fellow artists is now suddenly doing archery. He has no recollection of ever being an artist, and in this reality, he was never an artist. The rest of the Phantom Thieves speculate that Maruki must have looked into this guy's mind and basically went, I, Maruki, decide that this guy would be happier pursuing archery and not art, so I will make it so. The student himself had no say in this matter. Another example of how terrifying this is the bad ending if you don't complete Maruki's palace in time, where he comes to Joker and says, if you're being this decisive, then all this pressure must be making you unhappy. So, I've decided that it's for your own happiness and your own good that I will make you sleep forever and never have to make any choices in your life ever again. This also shows in the personalities test segment of Maruki's palace, which shows that Maruki, in his own mind, views anyone who doesn't align with his own ideology as having distorted thoughts and needing therapy. Even if Maruki himself is not a bad person, the whole idea of someone with that much power saying, only I know what's best for the world and what's best for you, was setting off major alarm bells. And, as talked about in a series on YouTube that I'm gonna plug because it seriously needs more attention, Counseling Student Reacts to Dr. Maruki. These videos show that while Maruki himself is a pretty nice guy and overall not a bad person, he is a terrible counselor, and I feel like that is intentional. The whole point of counseling is that the patient will eventually no longer need the counselor. The point is to empower them to change their own life on their own. Not to say, look, I know how to change your life, here's what you need to do, follow what I think. And all of it is compounded by the fact that Maruki himself is dealing with his own trauma in a very unhealthy way, and he's become so entrenched in his unhealthy coping mechanism of simply forgetting his pain and literally erasing it from existence, that he's come to honestly believe that everyone should cope with their pain and trauma that way. And that's why I still find him fairly sympathetic in the end. The fight against him is not just about saving reality, but I feel it's also about saving Maruki. Unlike many of the other palace rulers, I feel like Maruki is in the early stages of distortion. He's at the point where he's about to cross the line, and it's our job to stop him before he does so. He feels very capable of redemption is what I'm saying, and that's exactly what ends up happening in the new ending. There's a lot more I could say about Maruki, but I want to save some of my thoughts until I do a playthrough of that game myself. Believe me, I love his whole arc, I think he's an amazing character, and just one final thing, I think the idea of having a Persona user as the final boss, and one who has a will of rebellion similar to the Phantom Thieves, that's also an amazing idea. I do have one issue with the final boss fight itself though. I like the Azathoth phase, especially with its focus on technical damage and baton passing, which are a lot of the game mechanics that you've been learning to use throughout the whole game. So it's finally coming to a head there, but I don't like how the final phase is completely scripted. I feel like that's a bit of a lame end to what could have been a very satisfying boss fight. I also don't like how Maruki completely vanishes after you finish his palace until the epilogue. I know they probably wanted to keep you in suspense as to whether or not the change of heart stuck, but I do wish he got a little bit more closure. Speaking of closure in the epilogue though, for some reason Sumire doesn't even get a goodbye during the last day of interactivity. All you get is a short segment in the ending where she bumped into Joker at the train station and says hi. After all the build-up her own plot got during the third semester, I also feel like that's a bit of a letdown. I suppose speaking of the new ending though, I have to give my thoughts on it. A lot of people don't like the new ending, and I do admit, I'm a little mixed on it. Like I said, I like Maruki's ending. I don't really like Sumire's part of it. I don't like the fact that the rest of the thieves are running off with the cops still chasing them. I thought the original ending was better about that. But I actually prefer the after credits scene of this version to the original. It's more that they set very different tones. The way the original P5 ended felt to me like Ren being relieved that he's finally a free man, metaphorically and literally. But with the new Royal ending, him turning to see his reflection and the reflection turning into Joker and smiling, I actually think that fits his character a lot more. It's like his Joker persona, if you'll forgive the pun, is telling his civilian self, "You'll always be me, and don't you forget it." Like a lot of superheroes, the mask has become his true self, and his civilian identity has become the mask. And that's where I always saw Joker's character going, personally. But on the other hand, I did like all of the thieves leaving together on the bus in the other ending, so they both had their advantages, and there are a lot of elements in this one that are a little unsatisfying. I just like the reflection shot, personally. With that, I just want to quickly touch on one other thing that I really like, the Thieves Den. Now, the main thing that I like about this is the conversations that you can have with your teammates here, and after beating the game, the Confidant characters can also have conversations here too. Even though none of this is likely to be canon, it is really cool to see the party members get to interact with the Confidants, and the Confidants get to interact with each other. There's a lot of really, really nice conversations you can see here. The only issue I have with it is that most of the original game's trophies have been moved to Thieves Den Awards, so I feel like there isn't much point to the actual PlayStation trophies anymore. All of them are awarded for really easy things, such as progressing the story or just doing certain daily life tasks for the first time. It makes me think this game would actually work better on a system with no built-in achievements. Hint hint. I could talk about how some of the dungeons and boss fights have changed, but this video is already running very long as it is, so I'll just end my thoughts on Royal here. If you want to ask me anything else, say it in the comments and I'll try and answer you. I've got a lot to say about this game. So, thank you for listening, and I will see you all next time.